Ryan Geddie, YouTuber from Texas. Lindsey Graham once made a joke that if Ted Cruz was shot on the floor of the Senate, they would never solve the murder because there would be 49 suspects. Why does Ted Cruz keep getting elected in Texas if there is so much conventional wisdom that he is like one of the most loathed men in American politics?
That's a good question. I think the answer is that I think Ted Cruz is a very personally unlikable guy. But of course, most people don't have a personal relationship with their politicians, you know? So in Texas, Ted Cruz fits the bill of the kind of thing that the Republican primary voters want. He's very conservative. He's very outspoken in his conservatism. And so he keeps winning the primaries. And then Texas keeps voting for him in the general just because it's a mostly Republican state.
What's the other Texas senator like?
John Cornyn, he is much more important to the caucus. I think he used to be whip for the Republicans, and he made a play to be majority leader, but he lost, and I think now he's been marginalized a little. And now he's actually caught in a tough primary with Ken Paxton, who was the state attorney general, or is right now. But he's sort of mired in all sorts of controversy, but he's been able to sort of Ken Paxton has been able to parlay his own impeachment by Republicans, by the way, for his various corrupt dealings into a sort of like, they're trying to cancel me. And this has really helped him in the primary. And so that's the guy that's running against Cornyn right now, because Cornyn is not like a Republican firebrand, so to speak.
Is it going to work?
It's really close right now. The primary is like split 3 ways between Cornyn, Paxton, and this other guy named Hunt. And it's really, really close. So it's yet to be seen.
And the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, what's he like?
Well, he kind of wants to be like Ron DeSantis, I think, in the sense that he wants to be like the premier conservative governor. And so he does a lot of like culture war type stuff. He's been really into his big policy issue over the past several years has been school vouchers. So that's like money that the state is going to give to parents to enroll their kids in private schools. Right now, that's sort of that was a big political battle over the last several years in Texas. He got involved in several state house and state senate primaries to try and primary out of office Republicans who didn't support the school voucher thing. There was kind of a bipartisan coalition against the idea because there were a lot of rural Republicans, especially, who didn't like the idea of school vouchers because their districts didn't have any private schools. So that's the big issue that he's been focused on over the last several years. But then, of course, he's also made a name for himself being sort of first in line to do all sorts of stuff on immigration. So, you know, he bussed immigrants from Texas to blue states. That's something that got him in the national news a lot. He put this like razor wire thing in the middle of the Rio Grande, which made national news a while back. So that's the kind of guy he is. And of course, he's also in a wheelchair. That's the other thing that most people know about him.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I suppose that makes him one of the most powerful disabled politicians in American history. Has that been sort of part of his political brand at all? Disability advocacy or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, I think he doesn't. I don't think he really mentions it all that much. People in the disability, and so for those people that are watching that don't know, I'm missing a leg, which doesn't usually come up in terms of things that are relevant, but it is relevant in this case because it allows me to know that a lot of people in the disability sort of advocacy space make fun of him because while he was governor, the reason he's in a wheelchair is because a tree fell on him while he was in a car, I believe, and so it paralyzed him. And he made a lot of his money by suing because the tree fell on him, and he got a lot of money from that lawsuit. After he became governor, he signed a law that sort of limited the amount that people could win from lawsuits like that, or so the story goes. So a lot of people in disability advocacy circles sort of make fun of him for that. He's not known to be like a huge disability rights guy.
How did you lose your leg?
I have a congenital condition called fibular hemophilia. So I was born without fibula, which is the non-load-bearing bone in your leg, and that required me to have an amputation, like through my ankle, whenever I was a child.
Where did you go to school?
So whenever I was in K through 12, I lived in a town called Burleson, which is near the DFW area, south of Fort Worth. But I actually went to school in this school district called Joshua. Joshua was, I think, exurban is probably the way to describe it. It's like not quite totally rural, but also a little more rural than suburban, if that makes sense. And it definitely had a lot of rural character, I would say, culturally. And then after that, I went to college at UT Austin.
When did you graduate?
In high school, I graduated in 2019. That's right, I think. And then in college, I graduated in 22.
So you're how old?
I'm 24 right now.
And what did you study in university?
Government. Most places it's called political science, but I majored in government at UT because I guess they just want to be different. And my minor was in history.
Would you say you had a mostly middle class upbringing?
I think that's probably fair. I mean, both my parents work, so I think that lends itself to a middle. But they also both have college degrees, so I feel like that's probably a middle class lifestyle. I think. It's hard to define those things for yourself, I feel like. Or at least it is for me.
I've heard a lot over the years about how conservatives in Texas are fighting to exert control over the curriculum of Texas public schools and trying to make what's being taught more overtly conservative and all of that. Do you feel like you had a particularly right-wing education?
Well, the school that I went to was definitely being not conservative at that school district was definitely the minority position, the strong, small minority position. So I would say, most of my science teachers, I remember I did sort of an informal survey about this one time. Most of my science teachers didn't believe like in evolution or climate change. So, that's the sort of political environment, I guess. But I wouldn't say that I had like an overtly like conservative education in the sense that like the curriculum itself was trying to like make me conservative in any way. I think it was to the extent that was the case, it was more just, being in an environment where most people were conservative. I think that's really stepped up in the years since I've graduated high school, though, to be honest. Like they've recently passed a law to where if people donate the money or donate the posters, you have to hang up a copy of the 10 Commandments in all the classrooms in districts.
Oh, yeah.
I sort of feel like I was right at the beginning of where this sort of new wave of conservative efforts to exert control over school districts started. Like I feel like I didn't hear as much drama about that, like in terms of the book banning or trying to get stuff hung up in classrooms whenever I was in high school. But I feel like that's kicked up a little more since then.
So what's changed to make it start sort of kicking up?
I think the culture war stuff in general has just been turned up all over the place, all over the country. I'm not sure that that's anything that's unique to Texas, but there's just been much more of an effort to do that sort of thing. So I'm not sure that there's anything unique to Texas. I think that the culture war in general has just turned up the heat all over the country.
The only video on your channel that you've made that was explicitly about something relating to Texas was one in which you were speaking out against something called ESAs. And what are those, and why did you make that video?
So that's what I was talking about with the school voucher program. So my mom, this is probably important information for that. My mom is a public school teacher. She teaches kids who are blind and visually impaired, and that's really early. I'm surprised you've seen that video. That's really early in the Ryan Geddie catalog. Um, and I was experimenting with different kind of videos that I liked to make, and yeah, I made that video because it was an issue that um, I knew about and it impacted me personally. So ESA's education savings accounts, I believe, is what that stands for. But the idea, and it's been pushed in different forms throughout the last kind of decade of Texas politics, ways that the state can give families money to have kids attend private school instead of the public schools. The problem that I have with that is that it takes money away from the public school system without really any sort of accountability from the private schools. So the private schools can discriminate on who they take in. They don't have to take in kids that have disabilities of different kinds. They often don't have the facilities or the teachers or the professionals to help those kids anyway. And so it ends up taking away from the resources that the public schools need, in my opinion.
You worked for a time at the Texas legislature, doing what?
I was a legislative aide. I worked for a Democratic state representative at the Texas legislature. This was while I was in college. I was a legislative aide. In practice, that meant I was doing a lot of different things. So I was, helping write bills. I was helping write speeches. I did a lot of that. And then I was sort of the point staffer person for our office's efforts on redistricting, because I was there during redistricting.
You said in one of your videos that it made you a doomer on redistricting.
It's true. It did. The whole process is astoundingly bad. It's worse than you think it is. If you think that redistricting and just to clarify, redistricting is the process by which the boundaries of the congressional districts, of the state house districts, of the state senate districts are redrawn. Every 10 years usually they're redrawn. It's basically blatantly corrupt. I mean, it's there's all sorts of things about how politicians aren't supposed to talk about race. They're not supposed to talk about all these other categories that you're actually not legally allowed to consider whenever you're drawing the lines. They all do. They all talk about it. They all are just trying to ensure that they are making their seat as safe as possible, really. Yeah, it's not a good system. Having the politicians be in charge of that is a recipe for corruption. It is in Texas. It is corrupt in Texas, and I would assume it's corrupt everywhere.
You said you were working for a Democrat, yes?
Yes.
And so how is it that a Democrat was involved in redistricting, if they're the minority party in Texas, yes?
Yes, well, it's a huge, complicated process, and in Texas at this time there was a little more bipartisanship in the Texas House at this time. That's been a slowly waning thing over, well, it's been multiple decades at this point, but that's been slowly waning. But there was a little more bipartisanship in the Texas House than maybe you might expect. And so the Democrats could make suggestions. And it was more, just to really emphasize how truly kind of corrupt the system was, it was more about finding a situation where all the people in an area were kind of happy with what the new lines looked like. Then and the Republicans, if they wanted to overrule something and they wanted to really draw a specific person out of their own district, they would do that. They would be able to do that. But in most cases, I would say it was about finding a situation where most of the people in like an area were happy with that result, especially at the state house level.
How many videos have you made in all?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I really don't know, actually. I 50? I don't know. I would have to guess.
What is your most popular one?
What is my most popular one? It's probably my 12 political archetypes video, I would guess. I actually don't know. I haven't looked in a while. I sort of just kind of try and focus on the next one as soon as I finish the one that I put out. But I would guess it's my 12 political archetypes one, where I sort of go over these famous political cartoons and explain all the different references that they're making and who I think that they're based on.
On your YouTube channel, main page, you have this banner image with a quote that looks like it's from a poem. Let me just read it, and you can tell me what it means. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600, plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Then they rode back, but not the 600.
Yes, that's from my very first video. That's from my very first video. That's a poem about the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War, and I just needed something to put on the banner, and so I took images from this old movie where they had that poem in the movie, and I just took screenshots of it and stitched them together and made a banner out of it.
What is the Crimean War? The
Crimean War was a war between the powers of Europe over Crimea, basically. The British, and that was a famous. That's the poem is called "The Charge of the Light Brigade," and it was a famously bad military maneuver by the British, where a lot of the British Light Brigade, the mounted light cavalry, they charged into the Russians and were basically utterly destroyed, or almost utterly destroyed. And it's a poem about duty and sacrifice, and it's also a poem about about leadership and the power of good and bad leadership. But I like it mostly because it's a poem about duty, I think.
A few years ago, there were some big headlines about how Joe Rogan was moving to Texas, and then Elon Musk is moving to Texas with some of his companies and all of this. What does that represent?
That all these guys are moving to Texas?
Yeah, like this is sort of like it's a kind of narrative that seems kind of popular in sort of conservative world.
Well, I think it mostly represents that Texas has a more favorable corporate environment than California, which I think is where a lot of these guys moved from. And I'm not sure it signifies much beyond that. Austin is like a kind of, it's notable that they all moved to Austin, which is a very like hip, liberal city. People joke about, Austin being, sort of the blue dot in the middle of a sea of red. And so I think it's notable that they all moved to Austin rather than like Fort Worth, which is where I live, which is the largest, I think, urban red county, Tarrant County, the county that Fort Worth is in. I think it's the largest by population urban red county in the country. But, instead they all moved to Austin. So I'm not sure it signifies much of anything other than that Texas has a more favorable corporate tax situation than California. But I don't know. I mean, Austin for a time was kind of the conservative mecca. There was that university that opened there that was funded by a lot of the dark enlightenment guy, not dark enlightenment, the like intellectual dark web guys. The University of Austin, I think is what they call it. And that was supposed to be like an anti-woke university, I think was the pitch there. So I'm not sure how much of that is still going on. I know Rogan is still down there, and he has, his whole institution down there. I think he kind of runs the comedy scene in Austin. And I don't know if Elon Musk lives there still. I mean, I assume he probably does. He probably has a house there.
Despite being very conservative, I've often found it interesting that Texas is one of 5 states that doesn't have a white majority. And you read a lot about how, the Republican Party is becoming more white nationalist and more sort of comfortable with white nationalism. But that surely has to be less the case in Texas, or the Republican Party wouldn't be doing so well.
It's hard to say. I think, like the National Republican Party, there's sort of different currents in the Texas Republican Party. Um, there's a consulting firm that, at least for a time, was headquartered in Fort Worth called Pale Horse Strategies. And they were very much affiliated with like the white nationalist side of the Republican Party. And they did a lot of like Texas politics stuff.
Pale horse strategies. That's like from the book of Revelation, right? The pale horse is called death.
Yeah, that's what they called their consulting firm. And it was they had all sorts of meetings with like, yeah, I know Nick Fuentes was down here for a time, taking a meeting with them. Yeah, so they were very much and they were funded by these like two billionaire guys, these like oil billionaire guys in Texas. So, there's definitely that kind of current that's in Texas politics, but of course there's other currents that are in Texas politics, like the National Republican Party. I know whenever the second Trump administration was just starting, and they were making a big like anti-illegal immigration kind of media cycle. Greg Abbott got on TV and, sort of tried to assuage people that like, oh, it's actually not going to be that bad. And, we're going to talk to the employers to make sure that, our ranchers and our farmers are going to be able to have the labor that they need and that sort of thing. So I don't know. They're definitely, I don't think that the Texas Republican Party has been immune from that kind of, just white nationalist strain. I think it definitely exists. And I think especially if you look at the internal Republican politics, you'll see that it exists. But I don't know. I think just like the National Republican Party, there's multiple strains within the Texas Republican Party. And it's an active fight.
Whenever I've been to Texas, one of the things that has always really struck me is just how pronounced Hispanic culture is there. Here in Canada, we have this myth that we live in this bicultural, sort of bilingual society. But when I've been in places in Texas, everything seems a lot more functionally bicultural and bilingual than anything I've ever seen before.
Yeah, I haven't spent that much time in Canada. I went for the first time not too long ago. I went to Toronto, so I can't speak too much to the situation in Canada. But yeah, in Texas, it's not too uncommon to see signs in Spanish. Especially the further south you get, to see all sorts of things in Spanish. Yeah, I don't know. It's never been. I think growing up with it, it was never something that I even thought was like abnormal or something worth commenting on. And I think it's given me a sort of interesting perspective on the whole, I guess, immigration cultural conversation. You hear a lot of people complain about like enclaves. That's a complaint you hear on the right all the time about like the danger of having like enclaves of people. But like there's neighborhoods around here that speak Spanish, and I don't know, it's never really bothered me all that much, and I don't know if it's really caused any problems whatsoever. So,
what is Tex-Mex?
It's Texas style Mexican food. I gather that it's influenced by like northern Mexican food, especially. I can't pretend to be some sort of scholar on all the different types of Mexican cuisine, but I gather that northern Mexican food is a lot different from like central or southern Mexican food. And Tex-Mex, it's my understanding, is sort of like a blend of the taste preferences of people in Texas with kind of the styles of northern Mexican cooking.
Is it good?
I like it. There's Chuy's. That's a famous Tex-Mex chain. I eat there probably too frequently.
I once read this memoir of a Texas politician, and he talked about how there were certain cliches about Texas that Texans could not wait to bring up at any available opportunity when talking to non-Texans. And a lot of these sort of referred to the idea that Texas is like this uniquely special state and it gets to fly its flag at the same height as the US flag and all of this sort of thing. What's all that? What's all that about?
I did hear that one growing up, that Texas had this unique right to fly the flag at the same height as the U.S. flag. But I don't think that that's true. I think that that's just something that it's like a little bit of an urban myth. And then, of course, you have people who think that Texas has some sort of right to secede, which also isn't true. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of little myths about Texas. People in Texas are definitely proud of being from Texas. I think it can be a little bit overstated. I don't think it's I guess to make a Canadian comparison, it's nowhere near the same degree as like what you see in like Quebec, where there's been like active, serious movements for like independence. I think people in Texas are proud of their identity as Texans, but I don't think it's like the Texas nationalists, the true Texas nationalists are few and far between.
And a lot of this is justified by the idea that Texas was its own country at one time, right?
That's right. For a little bit, yeah. Texas got its independence in a war with Mexico. Several people forget this, but several states of Mexico at the time all basically were in open rebellion against the central Mexican government in response to several things that they were doing in the government of Santa Anna, who was sort of centralizing power in a way that several parts of Mexico did not like, and Texas was just the only one that succeeded.
Is Texas part of the South?
Sort of. If you look at them, I mean, yes, it is part of the South, uh, but I feel like what you're maybe getting at in there is like culturally. I think East Texas is definitely part of the South culturally. You can sort of see it on a map, where the map stops being green and starts being like beige. Uh, that's about where I think the South stops. And I think beyond that, it's more culturally Western. But of course, Texas was part of the Confederacy, and so that in that sense, it's part of the South. But if I was to divide Texas up into kind of cultural regions, I would say that the South stops somewhere east of Dallas, and after that, it's more culturally Western.
Texas people are famous for having these sort of wonderful drawling accents. Is that still common? You don't really have an accent at all.
Not really. I It's more common in East Texas than in West Texas, and then of course in South Texas there's like more Hispanic influence accents. But I'm from Fort Worth, and I was born in Dallas, and this is a very sort of. I mean, I have some Texasisms. I say y'all, and I'm sure there's some other words that I say that give me away as being from Texas. But no, I mean, a big famous one is people that say like oil instead of oil. Yeah. Um, and no, I don't do that. So I think it's more of like an Eastern Texas or a West Texas type thing where you hear the like strong accents.
Did your grandparents have really strong accents?
Stronger than mine. Yeah, for sure.
In the video you made about the ESAs, you at one point made reference to well-funded organizations out of Austin as having a big influence on Texas politics. So why Austin?
That's the capital of Texas. So that's where all the big like government relations, the Texas, um, yeah, the Texas capital is in Austin, and so all the big well-funded government relations organizations have an office there.
What sort of things are associated with the other big Texas cities?
I mean, Dallas is like I feel like Dallas's stereotypes are like banking, like business, uh, sort of very straight-laced and not very fun. I feel like that's sort of the Dallas stereotype. Houston, I think, is like oil. I feel like that's the traditional stereotype of Houston. Uh, but Houston is also a huge city. I mean, there's a lot of like cultural stuff out of Houston that, like, I think there's a lot of like rappers that are famous from Houston, a lot of musicians that are famous from Houston. I think Beyonce might be from Houston. Uh, and So there's a lot of like cultural stuff in Houston too. But I feel like the traditional stereotype for Houston is oil. Fort Worth is, I don't know, does Fort Worth have a stereotype? People call it Cowtown. Uh, it's historically a place where people drive the cows up to and then have them, shipped off in the rails to somewhere else to be consumed. San Antonio is the Alamo, of course. I feel like that's a big not stereotype, but that's probably the thing that's most prominently associated with San Antonio.
Do you know how many people in Texas overall?
I don't. Do you?
I don't actually. I'm curious. It's not the biggest state. I think it's the third biggest after California and New
In
York.
yeah, that tracks. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's in the tens of millions.
yeah.
Yes, yes. What is Blexus?
Blexes is like a meme about like blue Texas. So it's whenever Texas turns blue, turns Democratic.
Is that going to happen?
I don't know. I think this Senate race with I think if John Cornyn loses the primary to either of the other competitors, and I think there's a chance. I think Cornyn probably wins against Tallarico or Crockett, though. Those are the two Democratic primary candidates.
When I was young, I remember there was this Texas woman who would go on television a lot and talk about American politics, and her name was Ann Richards. So who is she?
Yes, yes. She was the last. She was the last Democratic governor of Texas, I believe. I think so. She was a woman, of course. She was the last woman governor that we had of Texas. And yeah, she's very valorized by Texas Democrats because it's the last time that we had a taste of power. She was very known for her like quips. She made fun of Bush. She was like, "Oh, poor George. He was born with a silver foot in his mouth." And that was his favorite, or that was a famous Ann Richards line.
So what was so different about her time versus now in terms of Texas politics?
Well, I mean, I wasn't even alive, so I can't give you any personal experience. But the way she's described it, I listened to an interview with her one time, and the way I heard her describe it was that there were just a lot of ancestral Democrats still around. It was kind of like the rest of the South. I mean, for a long time, the South was like a one-party state under the Democratic Party, due to the history of the Civil War and then segregation, and all the way up through till the 60s and 70s and 80s when things started to sort of shift. And that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, there were a lot of ancestral Democrats around, and they voted Democratic, and that just changed over time across the whole South, really.
Was there much racial segregation in Texas relative to other parts of the South? Do you know?
I don't know relative to other parts of the South. I mean, there was definitely racial segregation. Yeah, I mean, definitely. There's a building in Fort Worth that has like they turned the part of the railway station that used to be uh, excuse me for saying it, but the colored entrance. And they have like the signs all in there, and they turned it like into a museum uh, of like segregation, like memorializing that really horrible part of American history. And you can see the entrance was just like this crappy like side door basically, and it was where the trains would pull in, and the white entrance was on the side where the front of the train would pull in, and the colored entrance was on the side where the back of the train would pull in. So yeah, I mean, there was definitely segregation in Texas. I have no idea how it compared to segregation in like Alabama or Georgia.
Did you grow up in a very religious family?
Um, how would my parents describe their religion? I mean, we went to church. But I went to vacation Bible school whenever I was younger. I went to church camp whenever I was a little older. But I wouldn't say that we were like super, super religious. But I mean, we went.
What denomination?
Well, sometimes I went to the Southern Baptist Church, and then most of the time I went to the Presbyterian Church.
What do you think determines whether a family down there is like super Christian or not? Because I know that the stereotype in other parts of the South is that being sort of like very Christian is kind of a signifier of being sort of lower middle class. But I feel like Texas has always had this tradition of like very comfortably middle class people who are also very strident evangelical Christians and go to these big sort of fancy evangelical mega churches and all of this.
So the question is, what do I think determines whether someone is
Yeah, because like I mean, and then you go to other parts of Texas, and you know, in the big cities and that, people are very sort of secular and don't really sort of seem to be a part of this kind of evangelical culture. But you know, we have a sort of sense that this evangelical culture is prominent and certainly like politically consequential. So I don't know, is there a way that you can kind of tell if somebody's part of that or not, like variables in their background?
I mean, a lot of the big mega churches are in, at least suburban areas. The big mega churches aren't, out in the middle of nowhere. The biggest one, oh gosh, what's his name? Kenneth Copeland, I think, is around Fort Worth, and he's just like in the suburbs. I think that's his name. It's him or someone else. It's like a huge mega church. Um, and there's all sorts of those, and I think it's different in it's different maybe to and I've never lived someplace other than Texas, so I guess I can't say how religion works in like New Mexico or Massachusetts, but it's a big center of cultural life. Lots of events are organized through the church, uh, and so lots of people are just there to be part of that. Um, in terms of variables in people's background that influence whether or not they are religious or not, I mean, I think probably the biggest variable is whether they are whether they have friends that go to church, whether their parents went to church. Um, I'm not sure if there's like huge variables in back. I mean, of course, I think people that are more conservative are more likely to go to church frequently. But in terms of whether or not there's something in someone's background that makes them go to church or not, it probably is boring, but it would probably just be whether their parents went to church a lot.
Do you think you would ever leave Texas?
Probably. I want to at some point. I just not on any sort of principled like, I hate it here, but it would be nice to experience living somewhere else.
Where have you enjoyed being outside of Texas?
I visited Philadelphia once and I really liked Philadelphia. I thought it was nice. I thought the urban form of Philadelphia was very nice. I like all the old buildings and all the history. I also thought New York was cool whenever I visited New York. But I didn't really like California. Uh, you still have to drive everywhere in California. I don't really like driving. Not my favorite thing.
Well, Ryan Geddie, YouTuber from Texas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.